Welcome everybody to the Stay Strong webinar series. It is May 21st, I think, John, right?
Yeah. Who would have thought 2 months later we're still here.
We're still alive.
Working through stimulus.
All right, Hustle Firm presents Stay Strong webinar. Thanks again for everybody that's attending. You've got John Rizzo, managing partner here at RDG, myself, partner at RDG. Quick note again on technology. Remember, put all the questions in the Q&A section. We'll get to those. If you see a question that's similar to yours before asking it again, just like theirs, that'll kind of promote all the common questions, so we answer those first. If you have any issues, we've got Shelby behind the scenes. She'll make sure to take care of you in the chat. So questions in Q&A, chat in there. And then slides and recording of the presentation today will be available on our website in the Resource Center. John, you want to go through the agenda?
Yeah, here's our agenda for today. We've got some big changes, actually. Latest news will be all the updates that Dan will go through and the things that have changed. A lot has changed since our last webinar, since the loan forgiveness application has come out. And we'll actually go through those changes as well as going through an example in the application itself. And we have a special guest from Easy Access MD to talk about their efforts during all of COVID. And then we'll end with question and answer. We have our team behind the scenes answering questions as we go. We see the questions are already starting. Once again, I want to thank everybody for attending, especially here in Rochester. Such a beautiful day. Hopefully some of you are outside enjoying this today. A reminder that hopefully everyone's staying safe and healthy. Like we just mentioned in the opening, who would have thought that 2 months later we're still here and not every business is open. We're only in phase 1 of reopening here in our area. So hoping everyone is staying safe and healthy, and our thoughts and prayers are with everybody there. Also, thanks to our research team, like I mentioned, we have Ryan Lynn and Tim and Brian behind the scenes, once again, answering questions. We're going to try to answer every question that you have, or as many as we can. And thanks to Shelby behind the scenes with us here, and Crescendo Design for making our presentation look very nice.
All right, so with the latest news, we're going to pare down this section today so we can focus on forgiveness, but wanted to focus really on what happened. So we've got the players. Everyone knows the players by now, the Treasury and the SBA, the Senate, the House, the President. Everybody's working hard on these things. So really the biggest news that came out May 15th, is actually the 13th when they released this, but they tweeted about it on the 15th, that they released the PPPL first draft of the forgiveness application. So the application that you have to use to submit when you want to get your loan forgiven. So that was the huge news. The SBA noted that the form and instructions included things to reduce some burdens, simplify things, and really clarify. So this is the first big drop of information since the application. Other things that were noted, trending on Twitter here, is that everyone realizes that the 8-week timeline is really not working out the way they intended. So lots to do there, and lots of talk around how we can extend the 8 weeks and how we can fix that legislation to make it easier. So they're hoping to move quickly. That was as of the 17th that they've been talking about that. A group of senators, Joe Manchin, Mitt Romney, Senator Leahy, Gardner, Wyden, they all introduced legislation actually in the Senate to extend the 8-week period. So that's been big. We've been monitoring that. They've been talking about, it's called the DEAL Act, extending it from 8 to 16 weeks. So again, we're going to monitor that legislation and see what comes out of it. Speaking of, quick reminder on the pending legislation that's out there and how it's going to affect the PPP. So the first piece is PPPL taxability, Senate Bill 3612, basically saying, hey, when they wrote the bill, they said the income is tax-free. They never said anything about the expenses. IRS came out and said, well, if you're going to use tax-free income to reimburse expenses, you can't deduct those expenses. Congress said, hey, that wasn't really our intent. So they introduced a bill. That's the only way they can get around it, to override that and allow those deductions to be deducted. So we're monitoring that. And the second thing, just like we talked about, the DEAL Act, extending the CARES Act covered period from 8 weeks to 16 weeks. So big news. We're monitoring those developments. Those are the things that take an act of Congress, and it's taking an act of Congress to get those done. What's changed? All right, so the big things. What the application came out, it had clarifications, it had points, it had all sorts of pages, 11 pages long, lots there, lots not there. So let's talk about some big things that changed. So the first thing that we talked about that we were unclear on, cash versus accrual. Do I use amounts that are paid or do I use amounts that are incurred? So on page 2 of the application, it noted payroll costs paid and payroll costs incurred are generally eligible for forgiveness. Non-payroll costs paid during the covered period, which would mean in arrears, or incurred during the covered period and paid on or before the next billing date. So that's the clarification that came out. So John, why don't you talk about a little strategy and some interpretation, how we interpret that?
Yeah, and this is good news. We've been saying all along, hey, don't include any more than 8 weeks of cost. This kind of says it could be more than 8 weeks of cost. So it is therefore possible that more than 8 weeks of payroll can be forgiven. We've already had a client, their loan started on April 23rd. They had a payroll that they were paying from the 2 weeks before on April 23rd. Lucky for them, they can actually, that payroll that they paid on April 23rd would count in their 8-week period, and then they would go forward from there and have 8 weeks of payroll. So in their case, they may almost have 10 weeks of payroll included in their calculation. On the non-payroll costs, a little bit different. The example I would give is about rent. Your rent is due, say, June 1st, and you pay it June 1st, and your PPP loan doesn't end until, say, June 3rd. That June 1st rent payment, even though it covers the entire month of June, would be covered based on the definitions that came out in the application. So good news here about paid and incurred for your PPP expenses.
Right, so a lot of strategy there and making sure that you keep track of that and use that correctly. Second thing that came out, we talked a little bit about that, is the 8-week period. So we had been saying all along the 8-week period starts on loan origination date. When they came out with the application, they said that's true, except payroll costs, we're now going to allow that when borrowers with a biweekly or less frequent payroll period may elect to calculate the payroll costs using either the, starting on the date of disbursement, which is what we've been saying along, or this is the new thing, the alternative covered period. You can start your 8 weeks on the first day of the first pay period following the PPP loan disbursement date, assuming you have a biweekly or less frequent payroll. So John, what does that mean?
This is more of a simplification item, I think, because we are getting a lot of questions about, hey, do I have to take a portion of a payroll because my payroll isn't going to line up exactly 8 weeks from when my PPP loan starts. So they've come out and said, okay, if you're biweekly and your loan starts on a Wednesday and your pay period starts on a Friday, you can wait until Friday. How does this help you? It helps you if you're able to get back into business on that later date. And if the wait between when your loan starts and your biweekly period begins is long or longer, it's going to give you more days in order to, number one, open, and number two, hire back. But what you still want to do is still consider looking at both periods and determining which one is best for you and maximizes your loan forgiveness.
That's right. So definitely important to look at that strategy and try to pick up more dollars. The next thing was interest. So this isn't an interesting one, no pun intended. The application says business mortgage interest for any business mortgage obligation on real or personal property. So mortgages are typically on real property, buildings, land, etc., but they included or personal property. The thing about this is the CARES Act says what can you spend money on? You can spend it on payroll, rent, utilities, and interest on debt. It says interest on mortgage. It also says interest on non-mortgage debt. But then in the forgiveness section, 1106, it only says business mortgage interest. So we don't, the point of clarification here was that it came out and said you can do interest on real or personal property, but what we're still unsure of is whether you can include copier lease, copier debts on copiers or software packages or whatever the case is. So John, what other interpretation would you have there?
Yeah, I think what we say here is track both, continue to monitor both, see what's really happening. As you found in this process, and we said this from day one, that things will change on almost a daily basis. As we talked about in what's changed up above in the guidance, we're still waiting on a few things to change, such as the length of the loan. The length of time you have to spend it to 16 weeks. So there's a lot of things that keep changing. Our interpretation at this point is that, based on the application, is that you can include your interest on mortgages is for sure. Interest on other debt, we believe you can use the PPP money for those debts. However, those expenses would not be included in your forgiveness calculation.
Yeah, and it might be a good idea too, if you pay interest on debt, that any debt that's secured by real or personal property, we're intending that's what they're meaning by this. So unsecured debt, maybe not. Secured debt, maybe. Owner comp. So this is a big one. We've all known that the overall cap is $100,000 on an annual basis, so $15,385 over 8 weeks. What they said is for owners, which includes owner employees in an S corp, for example, or a C corp, self-employed individuals, general partners, the amount that they can apply for forgiveness is capped at $15,385, which is that 8-week equivalent of $100,000 for each individual, or the 8-week equivalent of their compensation in 19, whichever is less. So if you as an owner made $75,000 in 2019, you're not getting $15,385 over the 8 weeks. John, what else do we know about this?
Yeah, this was kind of big news, because prior to now, our interpretation is that owners could take themselves up to the $15,385. I think this comes into play mostly with S corp owners, because typically S corp owners will take a lower salary to try to minimize the amount of self-employment payroll taxes that they pay. So unfortunately, if you're an S corp owner and you paid yourself, less than $100,000 in wages last year, you're limited to the amount of wage you paid yourself. Secondly, and I saw one of these questions just come in, if you are a partnership, it would be based on your partnership income. So you have to see what your partnership income was in the prior year, and you'd be limited to your allocation of the partnership income. So this wasn't great news, that you couldn't pay any more to owners.
Guess you can't have your cake and eat it too, is what they say.
Yes, so.
FTEs, how many hours is an FTE? So we've been saying all along it was 30, and we did that interpretation by the Affordable Care Act. They came out and basically said, for each employee, enter the average number of hours paid per week, divide by 40. So instead of 30, it is now 40. An FTE is 40 hours. They also came out and said there's a simplified method. Rather than calculate whether they're over or under what fraction they are of an FTE, if they work 40 hours or more per week, they're a 1. If they work fewer than 40 hours, they're a 0.5. So John, what should we do with this information?
Yeah, this is another simplification. It's meant for simplification, but there's a lot of strategy behind it, because it can help you on the back end. If an employee worked less than 40 hours, then no matter how many hours they worked under the 40, they count as a 0.5, whether it was 1 hour or 39 hours. So there's strategy in when you're bringing people back for them to count as a full 0.5 can make a big difference in you obtaining your FTE number. So you got to go through the FTE calculations and determine which method results in a more favorable outcome for you, because there's a lot of strategy involved here.
Definitely. FTE reduction. So remember, the CARES Act has 2 limitations. If you don't bring everybody back, your forgiveness could be limited. If you don't pay everybody at least 75% of what they were making before, you could also be limited. So for this one, a lot of questions that we've got on almost every webinar is, hey, somebody doesn't want to come back because of unemployment. They're getting more unemployment staying home. They left, in 2020, and we based it on 2019. So that's out of our control. So they came out in this application and said there's a safe harbor and says, hey, if you made them an offer and they refused the offer, that's not going to count against you. If you fired them for cause, it's not going to count against you. If they voluntarily resigned or voluntarily requested a reduction in hours, those things don't work against you as long as they have not been replaced with someone else. So very important to note that if they've been replaced with someone else, you can't use this exception. So John, what else does this mean?
More great news. I mean, everything they've come out with is kind of pointing towards, hey, they want to get this money to business owners, and they want you to be able to have it forgiven. And that's everything we're seeing. And there were a lot of questions here, like, hey, I've been trying to hire people back, and they like the benefits of unemployment and don't want to come back, or any of these other items. You may have to fire someone, or someone may resign for other reason, or someone can't come back to work for health reasons. So this is a big win. You can kind of, remove them from your FTE calculations. But the big point here, though, is, cover your behind, right? CYA, make sure to document in writing, keep track of employees in this situation. We're very familiar with this in preparing tax returns and doing audits, that it's all about documentation. They can review your records for up to at least 6 years. So you want to make sure that if you're going to use this reduction clause, that you're documenting it properly.
Awesome. And the last thing that we want to point out is the certification. So they're going to make you certify 7 things. The first thing is, that the request you're submitting meets the requirements for forgiveness. So they want you to know all the requirements that there are and certify that you know them. It's fraud if you're not using the money for the authorized purpose. So I don't think they're going to have the fraud police out there from day one, but if you're not using this money for its intended purpose, they could come after you for that. You have to certify that you verified the info. You have to certify that you've submitted all the required information, that the information is true and correct, that if you submitted any tax documents, that those are consistent, and note that they can share those with other agencies. So I anticipate that they would do that. The IRS, the Treasury, and the SBA would all be sharing information. And you have to agree that the SBA can request more information later if they want. At the bottom of the application, they note that they have 6 years to come back to you. So you should keep this documentation for 6 years. All right, so with that, John's going to go through a simple example of the actual forgiveness application.
Great, thanks, Dan. So yeah, when the application first came out, it's pretty lengthy. It's about 10 pages long, but it did clarify a lot of the items we just went through, which is great. I mean, it's too bad we had to wait until now for all that clarification, but at least we have it now. So we wanted to kind of take everybody through an application that we completed, an example here. And it is, like Dan mentioned, a more simpler one. And then in the weeks ahead, we will be going over more complicated examples. So let's start with this and the assumptions. So this company has 3 employees plus the owner in the base period. After 8 weeks, they have the same 3 employees and the same owner. So nothing's really changed as far as number of employees. Their loan amount is $55,000, and they spent $41,250 on payroll and $13,750 on rent and utilities. So if you look to the right of the example here, you'll see a completed application. And the first thing you put in there is your loan amount that you're approved for and your disbursement date. Now your disbursement date in this case would be the date in which you receive the funds. You put the employees at the time of your loan application. That would be your FTEs for one of those 2 periods you have to choose from, and then your employees at the time of the application. If you received an EIDL advance, you'd put that amount there. In the case of this example, there was no EIDL advance received. You'd also put in your EIDL application number. You have to list your payroll schedule. This is a weekly payroll, and the covered period they chose to use from when their loan disbursement date as the starting date, and they went 8 weeks out to May 21st, which actually happens to be today. Their loan is ending today. What a coincidence. All right, so if you look down here, the way the application works is the pages behind roll up to the front page. So it's very similar to our experience with tax returns and financial statements. So we're very used to working with applications that kind of roll in this manner. So if you look at the summary here, the payroll costs were $41,250, and we'll look at the schedule and how we came up with that. Rent was $12,000, and utilities were $1,750. There's no adjustment for not meeting their FTEs or their salary or wage requirements. So this company maintained FTEs and they maintain compensation. So there's no adjustment there. So we add up all the amounts that they spent. They spent $55,000. There's no reduction. So their FTE reduction quotient will be 1.0, meaning they get full forgiveness on that of $55,000. You see how that kind of rolls to the forgiveness amount. So this is the summary page that gets submitted with your application. Now let's look at some of the back pages. So if we look at this, one thing we found in going through the application is that they are separating owners from employees. That's something we weren't aware of until the application came out. So in the case of this company, they have 3 employees and 1 owner. The 1 owner in this case and in all of your application cases would not be considered, would not be included as an FTE. So they had $30,000 that was paid to the 3 employees basically, and there are no reductions, like I said before. On the other worksheets, these are all zeros. We'll look at those worksheets and kind of roll them back to here. The owner was paid $11,250, and the total payroll costs were $41,250. So you see on the left there, the compensation for each individual. In this case, the employees were Curly, Larry, and Moe. If you ever watched the Three Stooges. Curly's average pay in 2019 was $9,230 over the 8 weeks. Larry was $7,834 over the 8 weeks, and Moe was $11,076 over the 8 weeks. The owner was paid $12,923. So that was their average over the time period that we chose from the past. After the 8 weeks, the spending of the $30,000 plus the $11,250 of the owners is broken down this way: $10,000 to Curly, $8,000 to Larry, $12,000 to Moe, $11,250 to the owner. If you look above, Curly, Larry, and Moe all received a small bonus from what they were paid the year before, or a payroll increase, which is allowed. And the owner actually had a decrease, which we know now the owner cannot receive more than $12,923, what they made in the prior 8-week period. So as we keep going, we're skipping some application pages that kind of talk about how the application should be filled out, but this table and worksheet needs to be completed. So you have to list every employee's name, their employee identifiers, the last 4 numbers of their Social Security number. The cash compensation is what they were paid over the 8 weeks, and the number of FTEs is their average FTEs. In this case, all 3 workers worked at least 40 hours. There's no salary reduction, so if you add up all their pay, that's the $30,000 that rolls up to the page before of all the employee compensation. Table 2, that there's no information, because here you have to list anyone that was employed by the borrower at any point during the cover period, all return recovery period, whose resident personal place of residence is the U.S. and received compensation at a rate of over $100,000. So this is where you're going to remove any amounts over the $100,000 would be in table 2. The safe harbor at the bottom, probably can't read it too well, but it asks the number of FTEs before and after. We had 3 before and 3 after, so we don't have to continue to calculate any sort of reduction there.
All right, so great example. That's more, again, this is the very simple example. We just wanted to show you, give you a little taste of how to fill out the application. The point here that we want to make is don't forget to review your strategy. There was strategy in how you spent the money. There's also strategy when you're filling out the application. As we know, there's a complex method and there's a simplified method for at least 2 items. So the important part is when you're completing the application for forgiveness, you look at your, how many employees did you rehire? And, it's a good idea to, if you still have time in your 8 weeks, which most people do we pay bonuses? And don't forget, any balance is payable over 2 years at 1%. We're expecting, as we noted in the first part of the webinar, for more guidance and more relief. And again, it's important to complete a draft application and look at the various different safe harbors and methods that we have and continue to plan and strategize so you get the most amount of your money forgiven.
All right, one other point I just want to make before we get to our special guest one point I want to make on the application is that there's a lot of documentation required. If you look at the next to last page of the application, you're going to find the payroll documentation they want to see, which are tax forms. They want actually specific documents, not just Excel spreadsheets. You're going to need filed tax forms, employee records, you're going to need payroll records. For the non-payroll items, you're going to need lease agreements and mortgage statements and other things. So, and they want you to actually retain those for at least 6 years. So there's a lot of information that you need to keep as you go through that. All right, so with that, we're going to continue to answer your questions behind the scenes. And we'd like to welcome Melissa Wilson here, who is with Easy Access MD. Hi, Melissa, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hi, John. I'm well. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to see how businesses like yours are helping those in the community during these difficult times. Great webinar.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And I know you're very busy. And I just want to, the reason we want to have Easy Access MD on today is all the efforts that, they are putting behind COVID and the work that they're doing. What we're talking about is more of the economic crisis, which is, meaningless compared to what, our first responders and those that are out in the trenches working to keep everybody healthy. And I just want to speak of our own experience. So Easy Access MD is a Rochester-based telehealth startup. It's mobile imaging, a mobile urgent care provider. It's the only mobile urgent care provider in Western New York. So basically, we at our RDG are a client of Easy Access MD. We offer this employee benefit to our employees, and it's been a great benefit for us. Basically, if someone's at home and they're not feeling well, or their kids aren't feeling well, and they don't want to leave to go to urgent care, especially now, everybody's, being careful about going out in public and especially going to medical facilities. You basically call up Easy Access MD and they'll come right to your home or your office. On the phone, they'll diagnose your situation, your problem, and come out and help you right at your house. We've used this personally at our house, our employees. Melissa shared with me some of our utilization rates, and we're at 171% utilization for our firm. So our employees are using it. That's just in the month of April, last month, and it is coincidental with what's happening with COVID. So it's been a great resource for us. We wanted to kind of mention it to everybody that's been on here, especially employers, but there's benefits for both employees and employers. So thank you, Melissa. And with that, I just wanted to ask, some of the key benefits during the COVID-19 outbreak. What is Easy Access doing in that area?
Thanks, John. During COVID and any challenging times, really, it's hard to think of the positives. But I'd like to think that one of the positive outcomes from this global health crisis is that more of us are becoming comfortable with using remote access to health providers. So it gives telehealth basically a chance in the spotlight to finally shine and become a critical part and player in keeping people safe at home, not having to go to an urgent care or a hospital for your standard flu, strep, ear infection, bringing kids into germy offices where there's a risk of transmission. So avoiding that entirely, because we can come to the home, we can come to the office and do 85% of what can be done in an urgent care setting. So we can do a rapid flu test, rapid strep test. We have throat cameras for things like sinus infections, strep throat. We can x-ray and ultrasound. So all of the things that are most commonly brought to urgent care clinics, we can do right at home, right at the office where you're safe. Our techs are fully equipped with head to toe PPE. So you can be sure that they're using the CDC guidelines to make sure that you're safe, they're safe, and we're keeping our community safe together.
No, that's great, and such a big benefit. Like I said, our firm has used it so much. We have other clients that are part of the Easy Access program. So we really appreciate you taking the time, coming on, educating us. If anyone's interested in more information about this, just let us know, send us a message. We will be sending this slide deck out to everyone like we always do. So just let us know, we'll send you that information. Well, thank you very much, Melissa. I know you know, like many other moms out there, and my wife and you and all the moms and dads that have to be home with their kids, you know, trying to work and take care of their kids and be a teacher and all those things. We really appreciate all that, and to all the moms and dads out there that are doing that, we thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Melissa. All right, so that's our presentation for today. I think we've answered most of the questions. We're going to continue answering questions here offline for a little bit. You know, as we always say here, stay strong. We'll continue diving into these forgiveness applications over the next few weeks and days, really, because it's changing every day, every hour. Looking for more guidance, looking for more relaxation of the rules so that hopefully the most amount of money can be forgiven. Feel free to reach out to us. We are going through the applications and offering that we can assist with the forgiveness application because, like we said, there is a lot of strategy still with your application that your bank's going to receive it and review it, but they're not going to help you with that strategy, especially when they have a large number of applications to get through and not always necessarily the resources to do that and review your strategy. So if we can help at all, please let us know.
Thanks, everybody.